I think there is such thing as an unhealthy obsession with history, where some people do go over historical issues way too much. They're so obsessed with certain key facts, certain points within history, and very often they're romancing of that period, that they don't really see the reality. But also people are obsessed with certain genocide, certain reasons to feel as if they're a victim, or that the victims should be respected above all, even though the victims very often are long, long dead, and those who now exist are largely not connected to those who were victimised. But people very often obsess over stuff simply because it's how human beings tend to operate. But I think it's one of those things you have to kind of snap yourself out of. And a romance for, oh, how ancient Hebrew people, how they operate, oh, ancient Egypt, oh, your heritage is Greek, and you think about the ancient Greeks and Macedonians, and it doesn't express the modern day. It's a rosy version of the future, heavily rose-tainted spectacles are applied. And the idea that things weren't so bad, but things weren't so bad if you were very, very rich. But power plays could make you very poor or lead to your death. But if you were poor, you were probably fucked and highly superstitious and in constant fear in some ways. But perhaps you had lived a good life if you were somewhere between extreme wealth and extreme poverty, where you were selling things in the marketplace and people would steal from you. I just don't. Maybe things were not so bad in some cases, in some places, at some times for some people, but largely human history is not a rosy picture, and most people had the troubles that we have today, and probably far, far worse. And that's when the bubonic plague wasn't in town, or there wasn't a case of cholera because of a polluted water supply, and a variety, a menagerie of other things that would end their life prematurely. The lack of modern medicine, which is still a problem in some parts of the world, and yeah, the list goes on of many, many issues, many, many problems. And if you trace back your history to some point in history, some part of the world, some time, some period, and you imagine yourself being, a descendant of this, a descendant of that, the odds are you're the ones who were suffering. Your ancestry was lucky enough not to be wiped out by a large variety of things that were wiping out huge numbers of people throughout human history. And that's before you even account for things like abuse of people at the hands of aggressive governments and divine kings and corrupt barons and the like, as well as slavery and the suffering of people within indentured servitude and the like, which is also a factor, or just simply people just being in poverty, just in destitution before there were benefits, before there was a support system, social democratic support system. And ignoring all of that, hey, just imagine if you were part of the, like Julius Caesar's family, or you were a high-ranking noble, or fighting in a war for the glory of Alexander the Great's Macedonian Empire. Just imagine. Well, you can imagine all you like. But the reality is these great things in history and these horrible things in history were not quite as nice or quite so perfect, quite so brilliant as some people like to imagine. And odds are, if you were around at that time, you would either be in a very bad position, or you would be, well, far from who you are today. You'd have to be some kind of monster in order to, wipe out thousands of the enemy. You'd have to be someone who's truly violent, not merely, like some people say about, modern soldiers, how violent they must be and how heartless a sniper must be. Imagine hacking your way through infantry, like spearmen and the like, in ancient times, and you're on horseback with your cavalry like unit or brigade, whatever the term would be, and all the blood, all the horror. I imagine it means that those who survive unscathed would have to be true monsters, far more than any modern war. But horrendous. Yet some people like to romance the idea. They like to imagine themselves as Julius Caesar, or as Augustus, or as, Claudius. Maybe not so much Nero, maybe not so much Caligula. But then again, maybe there are some people who imagine that too. They like to imagine themselves as Alexander the Great with this rosy image of the great hero Alexander the Great. But was he so heroic? Were many historical characters so nice as the history books write, considering most of human history is written by the victors? That's the very real problem. If you're a cold-hearted, pragmatic historian or amateur historian, or whatever the case may be, you're going to turn away from these pseudo-elements. You're going to turn away from these romantic elements where you can imagine yourself, oh yes, yes, I would have been a fine nobleman in the Tudor era in England, and I would be, it's like, well, yeah, you would have been probably better off than most, but not so great compared to today. In many ways, this is the best time in human history to live for most people on the planet, despite hardships. Maybe technically go back a little bit before the most recent inflation, or before the 2020 pandemic, perhaps, 2020, 2021, into 2022, the COVID experience. But broadly speaking, yeah, we're in the finest time, the finest era in some ways, but there's still room for improvement. And don't let romance fool you otherwise, But I do think that is the thing.